Friends, if you don't know Josh Stanton, you should. He is one of the kindest, uh, most generous, low key, brilliant, like just really super smart and kind of hides it sometimes just so we don't feel intimidated by how smart he is. Rabbis, I know one of my rabbis, one of my friends, we're being hosted by Eastern Temple in this time of us having had a fire, a trauma. So I'm wanting to host this space this morning for Josh to just talk with us about how we got here. As I look in social media and media, there is just some real not clear messages about why we're here and what has happened. And I'm going to just ask Josh to tell us from his point of view. This gathering is called Listen, Learn, and Lean into Peace. So there's lots of opinions about why we're here, but my friend Josh is going to talk to us about why we're here as our first question together. Josh, welcome, and thank you for being willing to be here today.
Thank you. And I just want to name that I have a cousin who was kidnapped and is being held in Gaza. And so if my emotions seem off kilter, it's because they really are. Like, I am not okay. Most Jews that I know are not okay. And certainly no Israelis I know are okay. And so I apologize if I am not especially articulate and lead with feelings rather than thoughts. And so I ask your forgiveness in advance. So from many Israeli standpoints, a lot of this dates back to the peace negotiations of the 1990s into 2000. And Israel, under different administrations, offered 95% of the West Bank, all of Gaza, rights to water, and from an Israeli standpoint, basically anything Palestinians could want for a Palestinian state. Now, whether the Palestinians were represented by a legitimate government or not, and whether Yasser Arafat conveyed or helped or supported at the ground level any elements of peace is pretty dubious. But from the Israeli standpoint, everything was offered. And what do Israelis feel that they were met with? The second intifada. And in 2000, that erupted for reasons of at least ostensibly the provocations of Ariel Sharon, the prime minister of Israel at the time, but in such a coordinated and systematic way that there is no possibility that it emerged organically overnight. And at least 1,500 Israelis were murdered on buses, in pizza parlors, in nightclubs, and Israeli life was disrupted fundamentally. And the response of the international community and many other people to the second intifada was silence, blame for responses, and anger as Israel went from offering 95% of the West Bank and East Jerusalem to the Palestinians to really clamping down and making movement, initially for purposes of preventing the smuggling of weapons and explosive devices, made the movement and day-to-day life of Palestinians difficult. From an Israeli standpoint, we offered you your own state, and you responded with suicide bombings. From a Palestinian standpoint on the ground, we didn't know anything about the diplomatic things that were underway because Yasser Arafat probably didn't communicate them. And instead, all we're seeing is a bunch of roadblocks. And the only Israelis we meet are no longer in the workplace because borders were more forcibly construed. But we're only seeing Israeli soldiers with M16s at checkpoints. And so that went from violence to systemic violence and trauma. And then in 2005, still in the thick of the Intifada, Ariel Sharon, a deeply troubling and complicated person, decided to engage in the unilateral withdrawal of all Israelis and Israeli settlers and Israeli military from Gaza. And that was, in his mind, part of a unilateral peace plan. We don't need to do this diplomatically. We will withdraw Israeli forces and troops. And Israel sent in commandos to forcibly evacuate Israeli settlers who were deemed to be doing something negative, both for Palestinians and Israelis. And within about a year and a half, Hamas took over Gaza. You can argue how undemocratically or not, how popular or not, but Hamas is an organization, sort of a sibling of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and elsewhere, whose core tenets are the destruction of Israel at any cost, essentially, irrespective of civilians or others. And since that time, there have been rockets fired at Israeli population centers. There have been attacks along the border, incendiary balloons literally trying to blow things up across the border, and a number of conflicts between the Israeli military and Hamas. And as I'm going to try to lead with compassion, with a caveat that I'm really hurting and angry right now. Invariably, Gaza is a very densely populated place. Think of the island of Manhattan, instead of 1.5 million people, 2.1 million people. Urban warfare is inherently deadly. And whenever Israel goes in with troops, it is to avoid bombardment, which is even worse. But when you are going door to door to try to catch members of Hamas, there are going to be civilians who die. If Israel today, in response to what happened, wanted to flatten Gaza, it has the military capacity to do so. The reason there are 400,000 troops arrayed at the Gaza border is to avoid that response. So that is one construal that I would provide. And more recently, I think for me, as a person who is a peacenik to the core, the murder of 1,000 Israeli civilians, the rape of 100, the discovery of a mass grave of beheaded babies who had been burnt and tortured in front of their parents, and the kidnapping of over 100 Israelis gives credibility to all of the worst things that right-wingers who do not want peace have long been saying about Palestinians. And so that is the painful place, that I do not want to feel anger towards Palestinians. But there have been mass celebrations in Ramallah and East Jerusalem and other parts of the West Bank that are not under Gaza rule, that have agency to join or not in these sorts of celebrations. And the idea of having dessert and a party with carnage like this, started unilaterally by Hamas, makes me sick to my stomach and really fearful about whether there can be peace, and whether at the street level, there are partners for peace.
Thank you, Josh. The picture of charred, beheaded babies, women raped, and 1,000 dead is mind-blowing.
It's
Right.
being called Israel's 9/11. And the relative numbers, again, numbers cannot tell a story, but in terms of impact, it would be the equivalent of about 30,000 Americans killed in this way. And the barbarity of it is the piece that hurts more. The kidnapping hurts more than the murders, because there is a sadistic glee that comes from kidnapping and holding control over a person. Mass rape as a tool of war. And then torturing children. We want to talk dehumanization. I cannot think of better ways to dehumanize Jews, who have a pretty long history of being dehumanized. And I guess what stings as an American Jew are seeing the people trying to glorify or justify this brutality as an act of liberation. I am somebody who feels very deeply for Palestinians, who spends a lot of time with Palestinians, who has tried to build bridges with Palestinians. And I cannot imagine war crimes like this being construed in any coherent way as an act of liberation.
Right.
If you want Palestinians to have an independent sovereign state, another try at it, having had it in the 1990s, I'm okay with that. And if you think that the Israeli military occupation of the West Bank is bad for Palestinian life, I would be the first to agree with you. If you think that I would be angry at Israel if I were Palestinian, you're right. If you think that the blockade of Gaza at different points and in varying intensities has been unfair and in ways inhumane, I would agree. Does any of that add up to what we just saw? In no possible way.
Right.
And so what I'm grappling with is cruelty of a kind, of a scale, and as evidence of sort of ideological spread that is really hard to reckon with and grapple with.
Yeah.
And so I sit there trying to think how, dear Palestinian friends, I'm thinking of Nisreen, my wife's office mate from the Israeli equivalent of the ACLU, who in the middle of Ramadan fasting came out to see me and visit me while I was in Jerusalem because she's like family. And I'm like, she's such a good person. How can she even be of the same group of people in any possible way as those who did this? And as those who are celebrating in East Jerusalem, where she lives, and as those who are not, she's one of the best lawyers in Israel and the West Bank who are not pursuing legal means to liberation or advocacy, but who just rejoice in dead Jews. And I don't see how she has any connection to them. I don't see how many of my other Palestinian friends have connection. And yet I'm struggling to unsee what I've seen over the past days. And so I'm hurting. I'm angry. I don't know what to say. And I'm really confused and worried that this portends more war, not another peace process.
Gosh, I wish I was at the temple to give you a squeeze right now.
I wish you were too, to be honest. I'm looking forward to a Reverend Dr. Jacqui Lewis hug.
I'm a good squeezer. I'll squeeze you good, and you'll squeeze back. Listen, I'm going to take a stab at saying something. Let me not use that language. I'm going to take a try at saying something that I hope the people who are listening will hear my translation attempt, right? I'm trying to translate something. I'm trying to make some sense of this, right? Listen, learn, lean into peace, right? So in the world of worlds out there are people who are, my core message in the world is God loves us all, and we all deserve safety and well-being and wholeness and healing, no matter what our religion is. Like, that's my core message. My friends are atheists and universalists and Buddhists and Jews and Muslims, all of that. Fact. I've been to Israel 5 times. Josh knows, and you can't learn Israel in 5 visits, but you do get to get a sense of texture and taste. And I've watched Israeli and Palestinian soldiers do a program called One, where they're saying we can make peace where we are. I've been to the places where there's solidarity. I've been to the places where there's conversation. I've been to the checkpoints. I've been to the barbed wire. I've been to Shabbat meals, in the homes of beautiful people. I've been to Christian spaces in Palestine. I feel like I've just got a little snapshot, Josh, that a lot of people don't have, right? But you can't have if you don't go. That's one thing. But the other thing is this kind of like Hamas is all of Palestine. Like, Hamas represents all of the Palestinians. And they don't, right? Like, we know that that's not true. So if there's one takeaway from this talk, like, Josh doesn't think that's true, and I know that that's not true. So when someone writes in my social feed, these people are fighting for Palestinian liberation, they are not. They are fighting for it. They are enacting terror upon Israelis. And that's not the same thing. That's just not the same thing. They can be frustrated, they can be angry, they can be sad, they can protest. We are people who protest. We stand up for what we think is right. Burning children is not standing up for shit except burning children. That's just what it is. It's not. Raping the women is not standing up for freedom, it's just raping the women. In a way, it feels to me, Josh, and I want you to push me back, it is like Hamas is like the Klan, or Hamas is like the white people who felt threatened by Black success and burned down, Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Or the people who felt outraged at liberation of Africans and their, and they lynched, they lynched a mass lynching, right? That's how it feels to me, is the corollary. Like Hamas might be made up of some Palestinian people, but they are not the Palestinian people. And so
I
it's just
think
like,
what you're saying is so important.
that right?
Insofar as, the joke about Jews is for every two Jews, there are three opinions. I am pretty confident the same is true about Palestinians. It is not like these people are those people. What scares me about this moment are the popular shows of support for Hamas after its most egregious actions. What is not clear and cannot be ascertained because Hamas is running a theocracy is how popular they are and to what extent it is people living in fear. And one of the worries is that in the West Bank, they are gaining in popularity and might come to overthrow the Palestinian Authority as sort of the governing force in the West Bank. And so I hope you are right that they are the KKK. My fear from the last handful of days is that they are far more popular than the KKK, and that it's more like the Dixiecrats as opposed to who are all Jim Crow all the way and, aid and abet all kinds of horrible things, but also have real political clout on the ground. I am praying I am wrong. I know too many wonderful Palestinians to believe that they could be this popular, and yet I have fears.
I understand. I feel that fear with you, right? And I can't, I don't want to draw false parallels, right, Josh? That's not how we talk to each other. But I do sense there's a kind of like, forgive me, in the United States, with the terror that happened, the pulling of babies out of mothers' wombs, Josh, right? The bashing in of a boy's head for just, burning bodies, that we've had that terror in the United States, and we've buried it so deeply in our consciousness that some of the people that are outraged about this violence in Judaism are the same people who were on the shoulders of the fathers watching the lynchings. Like we nicetized our terror, Josh. We prettied it up. We made it teacup. We made it Southern strategy. Maybe you're saying that a fear is that the horror of Hamas's activities are accompanied by an apathy or a we really want this to fall apartness, or not enough outrage from good people. Are you saying that as well?
Thank you. I think that is very well said. I think it's been interesting watching the number of armchair pundits who have emerged. That I don't pretend I did not convey a multifaceted narrative. I conveyed the narrative as I understood it, and I'm sure there are many more truths to be had in other narratives. But people who don't really even have access to a single coherent narrative are posting and sharing and celebrating or decrying without listening and understanding. And I would just say, as an unequivocal message, those who are construing Hamas's rape, murder, and torture as a positive thing in any way are saying something that is hateful to Jews. And whether or not you also want to talk about the genuine hardship that Palestinians face, I would say by all means, maybe in a different sentence or paragraph, because yes, there is an ongoing conflict between two peoples in one piece of land. And yes, feeling empathy and sympathy for Palestinians is really important.
Yes.
And in any way trying to justify or suggest this is positive is cruel and brazen anti-Semitism. There was an email sent out by the head of the student body president of NYU Law School about why this was a great thing. And the idea that a future lawyer would celebrate war crimes is a little bit beyond my comprehension. And so it's, I would say if you're posting something positive about the current moment, you're missing something big. If you're posting something empathetic and compassionate, I can disagree with you over who deserves more empathy and compassion, but we can at least talk to each other. And that might be a really good starting place. And one last thing, our cantor Olivia Brodsky made an incredibly good point that we have started gamifying this war. If you look at news sites, it's all about body count. It is not what happened, why, how, and to whom. And the moment it is whoever loses more lives wins the war of public opinion, we have dehumanized ourselves and each other. And so, be compassionate. Do not glorify what just happened to Israeli civilians in any way or try to justify it. And don't get into the numbers game, because a human life can never be described as a number.
Thank you, Josh. Gamifying about numbers and also gamifying about language. Did somebody die or were they killed? And like this, the reason I asked you to come to this digital space, Josh, is because the particularity of story does teach us, right? Like you're not saying, I'm a political analysis and here's the thing. You're like, this is what I understand to be happening. And I trust you and your voice matters. And it matters to me that people hear you talk about what's happened from your point of view so they can like investigate their point of view. What I'm trying to say, Josh, is like, I'm a Black woman in America, and this place does not still yet value my body. But on any given day, like let's say, and someone wrote this in my feed, like, when Mandela was trying to get us free in South Africa, he was violent and and he wasn't a terrorist. Yes, he was. Then he stopped being one, right? Then he stopped being one, right? Like if I, as an African American woman, watched Black people, I don't know, parachute into like Connecticut or something, you know what I mean? And say, for freedom, we're going to kick whitey's behind and just rape the people and kill the people and bash the babies' heads in and kidnap some people. That's what this is. Like this, that's what this is. This is like, I can't. I'm not even going to try to say
the parallels break down, but at the end of the day, killing civilians is not a way to wage peace. And the continually missed opportunity on the part of the Palestinians is that a non-violent resistance movement could bring Israel to a standstill and force concessions at the negotiating table. If there were a Gandhi, now would be a really good moment. If there were a Mandela, now would be a really good moment. And instead, we are seeing violence being glorified, and we're seeing a failure of leadership. If the people who are being elevated are promoting violence, that's a problem, and it's also an ineffective strategy. And so I am not opposed to mass nonviolent protest movements saying, Israel, we need you to first loosen your grip on checkpoints and other things in the West Bank. You need to evacuate 500,000 settlers from the West Bank. But if you do it peacefully, no one is worried you're going to enter the country and rape and murder over 1,000 people. And so that would be an avenue to peace and justice for Palestinians. It is not one that to date has been pursued in any systematic way. And that is, I think, for me as someone who loves Israel, one who hopes that Palestinian leaders rise to the occasion, because ultimately, I think everybody wants a two-state solution unless they want war. And that means...
Let's say that one more time, Josh.
Everyone wants a two-state solution unless they want war. And until just a couple of years ago, the majority of both Israelis and Palestinians wanted a two-state solution, including the likelihood that a capital of Palestine would be in East Jerusalem. And the fact that those numbers are down more recently is a tragedy unto itself and a symptom of hopelessness. But waging peace would be awfully effective. Waging brutality only serves the status quo.
Josh, I want to ask a question here. In my times in Israel, Palestine, what you say is true. Everyone is wanting a two-state solution. And I felt maybe 10 years ago, I felt like it was more like we were right. Someone wrote in the chat, like, yeah, well, I felt like we're closer to that reality. Do you think that just the rising fascism around the globe has diminished that possibility, or do you think there's still a yearning for peace?
I think there's still a yearning that has been tempered by the Second Intifada. And Israelis, after seeing school children blown up on their way to school and watching, I mean, every single Israeli I know was within earshot of a suicide bombing or lost someone in a suicide bombing. And so, irrespective of numbers killed, everybody saw something awful, and that greatly diminished the belief that peace was possible. So I think there's still a yearning. I think that there is still a hope, but I think it feels abstract in a way that it didn't in the 1990s and even at the beginning of the 2000s.
Josh, I chose this format so we could center your voice. And I'm so grateful that you would show us your heart and put it in our hands, is what I want to say. And I just pledge to hold your heart in my hands as a friend. I'm grieving with you. I'm outraged with you. I'm so disappointed and sad to see people delighting in this violence. And friends, my calling into action for us as we close with a prayer is for us to listen, listen, listen. Not just in your echo chamber, the things you usually see or hear, but change the channel and listen. Listen for the voices that will teach you what's really happening on the ground. And don't amplify anything that you know will be hurtful. Like it's just like be quiet if you need to. But what hurts, I think, right now, Palestinians and Jews, is the inarticulate, unwise banter from Americans who don't really know what we're talking about. Let's just stand down if you don't know. Maybe use this time. Ben's going to put some links. Either he's putting them in the chat, Ben, or are you going to put them on the website of things to look at, to read, to see, to learn?
Yeah, they're all on the website. I'm going to put a link to that page here in the chat, middlechurch.org/peace. There is humanitarian aid resources that you can donate to. There's some interactive timelines where you can really research more deeply about the history of the region. There's some books, some movies. There's lots of different resources for you to go and explore and learn more deeply.
Thank you, Ben. And friends, Josh said, let's talk about checkpoints and loosening grips, right? Let's talk about freedoms. Let's talk about two-state. Let's talk about how to get to another place. But let's not delight in this horror as an act of liberation. It is not that. It is not that from my point of view. And I just want you to know that, y'all. If you come to my pages, I'm not celebrating this violence. I am asking the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Rhea, and Leah, and Mary, and Hagar, and all the people, Ishmael and Isaac, the one God that we believe is one God, to bless this human tragedy with something different that is peace. Josh, let me give you the last word if you want to give us a prayer, or I'll pray for you.
I pray to the God that created this world to be with us in a moment in which our creations and our hopes and so many possibilities feel as though they have been dashed. Jews around the world return to the story of Genesis today or this week in order to give us hope that we can build once more, that we can co-create with our Israeli kin, and I pray one day our Palestinian kin, a place that is filled with peace and possibility, a place that embraces complexity, and a place that enables us all to live our best lives. May that God of complexity and creation be with us now.
Amen. You can hear more of Josh at Easton Temple, and you can hear more of Jacqui at Easton Temple through middlechurch.org. Josh, I love you.
I love you too. Thank you.
Please you the next time I see you, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, friends. Go and be well. Go and pray for peace.